So thank you so much for joining us today. This is obviously a bit of a unique workshop. We haven't run something like this before. So what we're doing is trying to shine a light on some of the cohorts at UNSW, which we may not always think about. So we have a host of incredible presenters here, but what I'll let them do is introduce themselves as they come up. So yeah, they're not standing up and down unnecessarily. Beautiful, alrighty. So, but before we get into that, of course you'd stop working. Yep. Okay, the clicker doesn't work, guys. Oh wait. Okay, no, I did it. So, I'd like to show my respect and acknowledge the Bidjigal people, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which this meeting takes place, and to the elders past and present. I'd also like to acknowledge and show my respects to the traditional custodians of the lands of all the people connecting online, and anyone online, if you'd like to share the land that you're connected on, that would be incredible. Okay, beautiful. So the agenda, I'm going to go first today, just so I get myself out of the way and I can focus on what else is saying. And you'll see why I need to do it like that in a moment, because I'm talking about undiagnosed disability. We then are going to look at rural and remote students, students as carers, refugee students and forced migration, Pasifika students, under 18 students. And then we should have a solid amount of time for questions, which will be awesome. Okay, I'm going to start my timer. So I've added pictures just to make the timeline a bit more interesting. But as you can see, going through primary school, high school, undergraduate degree, I had no diagnosis whatsoever. When I was a toddler and a primary school kid, as you can see from that photo, I was super awkward, was very shy. I didn't like people coming up to me. In high school, I learned to mask it. And the undergraduate degree, that photo in particular, I used to call it getting my soul back, was sitting in the sun and reading a book. When I started my career, I was diagnosed with depression, and it was only after I had a few crying breakdowns that a boss suggested I speak to someone. Then as my career progressed, it then led to a severe depression diagnosis and anxiety. At the time, I also had off the scale stress ratings. It turns out being a teacher is not for me. I get too emotionally invested in my students and at the detriment of my own health. So, but I was really stubborn and wanted to stay. So I did a postgraduate degree in inclusive teaching and inclusive education, because it has a lifespan perspective. In that period, I met my partner, who is a massive help for me and part of my support system. I tried to stay in the career. I couldn't. So then I thought, screw everything. I'm going corporate. I'm going to make a bunch of money. Meh. Turns out I couldn't do that because I need a job with a soul. So, and then literally a week before I started at UNSW, I got my ADHD diagnosis. So at the age of 30, I finally got all the puzzle pieces together. So part of the reason why I'm saying this is my undergraduate degree. It was an education degree in general, but not always taught inclusively. I had a credit average. My postgraduate, my master's in inclusive education, the teachers practiced what they preached, and I achieved the master's with excellence. So I had a high distinction average. So that is a very solid difference between inclusive teaching and non-inclusive teaching, I can say personally. And because I didn't have an ELP, I didn't have any of that stuff because I didn't know what was going on. And my depression, it was like, well, I just got to not be depressed in class. Like I didn't ask for any help with that initially. I did need to eventually. So what prevents people getting diagnosed? Experiences for me, I didn't know anyone, or the people that I did know, particularly with depression, I had friends that would self-harm, and because I don't and never have self-harmed, I thought, oh, well, I can't have depression because I don't hurt myself. And I come from like a middle upper class, have a supportive family, everything like that. I thought, oh, I have no reason to be depressed. ADHD, no clue. Even doing my master's, learning about how to support people with ADHD, it never clicked that, oh yeah, that's what I do. Access is a massive thing. So having access to pediatricians for children, having access to doctors, even for me to access a psychiatrist to get my ADHD diagnosis was an 8-month wait to see someone. And that was after the back and forth of like, my life would have been different if I had found out ages ago, you know, the whole existential crisis that happened when I realized that might be going on. The cost, I'm going to go into detail on that in the next slide. And cultural considerations. So for me, the cultural thing is the classic white people sweep it under the rug, sort of everything's fine, just act positive, yay. But I've definitely taught students where family were ashamed to seek any support. And so there's lots of different areas there. So, cost. Oh my gosh, I have 40 seconds left. Okay, so my friend who also is seeking a diagnosis, he got talked into doing a consult for $1,500. Not necessary. He didn't actually get a diagnosis out of it. Then the initial psychiatrist appointment, then per appointment, that's how much it costs. Every month, that's how much I'm spending on medication. So the first one's not me, the rest are all me. So you can see in the first year, if you are talked into paying that, it's almost $3,000 to get your diagnosis. So imagine our students with the cost of living crisis, how difficult that is for them to actually get a diagnosis. Yes, 2 seconds over. So all of that to say, teaching inclusively makes a difference. Not everyone can or will know about their diagnosis. So teaching inclusively really helps. Okay, thank you. We're gonna jump on to rural and remote students. Thanks.
What?
Yes, it is.
Oh, amazing. Hello, my name's Kate. So I am in PVC-SS, as I've just established. I just forgot what the acronym was that I'm in because it changed all the time. But I'm in the student life / student engagement team, and I manage a program called Start UNSW. You might have heard of it, you might have not. It's basically a transition and ongoing support program for our LSES students, regional, rural, and remote students. And also students that have come through the Gateway Admissions pathway. So obviously I'm talking about the rural and remote students here. I just thought, I'm not going to read through just because of time, but I actually asked a couple of our peer mentors who are from rural and regional areas just to kind of give you a bit of an indication from their perspective, kind of the challenges that they have encountered coming to UNSW. I'll let you read them because I know they're getting slides afterwards, so I won't read them word for word. But the general consensus between Masons and Julia just was the expectation of coming to UNSW and the expectation to succeed. Like if you're leaving your town or you're leaving your small life, as they've kind of put it, is the expectation that you have to succeed, you have to do really, really well, otherwise don't come back, is kind of what they said. And it seems obvious, but it's something that we can easily forget, is just how far they're actually travelling. Like it seems obvious in the name, but kind of day-to-day life, they've kind of mingled back into like big city life and things like that. But the general consensus between the two of them here is just how daunting and how even like Julia's in her 4th year, I believe, and even now being 4 years into Sydney life, she still struggles with kind of being away from home and having that expectation, and just being in such a big city when she's obviously from such a small place. So I just wanted to put them there because I think it's all well and good me talking about it, but I wanted to kind of give you a first-hand view. So just a couple of challenges, and this is from the National kind of Education Strategy for calling triple R, so I don't have to keep saying it. But these are just a couple of the challenges, and I know we all kind of like I said, it seems very obvious that they're coming away from home and they're travelling really, really far, but kind of on that day to day, and I work super closely with the mentors on almost a daily basis, and even sometimes I forget kind of just how far they've come, especially from being from the UK. I've not quite grasped how big Australia is. So it's very, sometimes day to day, it's still, those challenges kind of get away from me. But this is from the National Education Strategies. A couple of the common challenges, I guess, obviously the additional financial cost of having to relocate and move away from home, fewer education opportunities, they're less likely to undertake tertiary education as well. So obviously the students that are here have done an incredible job even to get into the foot of UNSW, and I think that's something that we really have to recognise when we're interacting with them, just how far they've come, even just to get in the door, let alone get to their third or fourth or fifth year of study. And the aspirations generally aren't as high within students from those areas as well as the metropolitan areas. So I think just acknowledging when we're talking to them and talking with them, just acknowledging how far they've actually come just to get here is a really big thing, and just how many hurdles they've had to overcome, like I said, especially to get to somewhere like UNSW as well. Like, it's such an incredible place to be. And Julia said in one of her quotes as well, like, it's all in good going to uni, but going to somewhere as highly ranked as UNSW is just, the pressure is just crazy. So although we are fantastic, I think the fact that we are fantastic does also cause extra pressure for those students. So it's just something to remember. And why the additional support matters compared to those living in metropolitan areas, they've got lower educational attainment in school. So again, the fact they've got here is incredible, because they are less likely to have that higher attainment when they're in their high schools, which is a big reason the Gateway programme is obviously so important, because they go into those high schools and deliver that kind of attainment raising programme from year 7 up to when they leave high school. And the students that are growing up in those areas are 40% less likely to gain a higher education qualification, and less than half as likely to gain a bachelor or above, which I think is just, again, just something to remember. How can we support them? Draw on the expertise, and I think this is such a big one, is the student as partners approaches, just really acknowledging how much these students can give to the community, and how much their experience really benefits the experience they have here, and how much knowledge and how much incredible, just life knowledge, even though they're only 18, like just how much they've overcome to get to where they are, and recognise the impact of distance, multiple responsibilities as well. And again, something that Julia mentioned is she's got a lot of family, and her family have a lot of needs back in Dubbo, and she feels like she can't support them as well as she could do being in Sydney, but she obviously then wants to help herself and pursue her own career and things like that. So it's all those things that are it's just very easy. And this is more we kind of all know these things because it's in the name, but it is something on a day-to-day basis that we might not constantly consider, I guess. There we go.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Kate. We have the incredible Dom talking about students as parents.
Okay, great. Thanks, Lucy, and thanks for putting on this workshop, this session. I think it's great to do this as a starting point about working with students. And one thing that I think that Lucy mentioned about this idea of reflecting on ourselves, well, I think that's a really important part of this process, that for particularly what I'm going to be talking about with students as carers, I think for so many staff members, if not all of us, at some level, there are caring responsibilities which are different from being an 18-year-old. So I think that's actually important to take into account as well, as then also talking about more official roles as students as carers. So my name's Dominic Fitzsimmons. I'm from the academic skills team as part of student learning, an excellent group of people who are called the academic learning facilitators. Charlotte Long is the head of student learning, and I thank her too for all the support she gives to us to participate in all these workshops and sessions. I just put a bunch of different things there up on the screen that we do. partly just to show that I suppose we have an interesting look into a cross-section of how students and academic staff and administrative staff as well work at the university. So we work at a number of different levels, and I think we're quite fortunate in being able to see those things. Just a couple of things I want to mention here for today is the enabling preparation programs. 2 different programs that we run, one for mature age students and one for students who are younger, between 17 and 19, and have suffered, as we say, some kind of social or educational disadvantage under the access criteria, because they're the example I want to talk about today. Okay. This one. Okay. So a couple of points I wanted to make when we think about students as carers. And again, as Kate was saying, some of these are obvious, but also some of the things to keep in mind, that this idea of it being an everyday task. Also that it is often somebody who they know. So there's a kind of emotional investment, which is much further beyond when you work for someone, you're paid, you finish at the end of the day, you go home. Obviously, it's very hard to disconnect, so to speak. So I think this is a really important part. Often to this idea of being unpaid as well is important too, because then the sense of obligation, sense as we talked about with Kate was talking about cultural obligations, cultural expectations. I think that's also part of what we're talking about here for students who are carers. Plus, I would also talk about the idea of not just the emotional needs, but also the physical needs, and more importantly, perhaps the time needs, because we often talk about how much time students need to take in terms of just doing the everyday work of being a student, and then caring comes on top of that. So I think that's also important when we're thinking about what students bring with them. Okay. How it impacts both on us, whether it's in terms of being academics, whether it's been administrative staff, management staff, etc., or support staff. I think there are lots of different things. Firstly, the idea of time. Time for many of the students who are carers is much more unpredictable in some ways, but also quite fixed in terms of what they have to do. This can have, I think, a lot of different outcomes. 2 students I want to talk about as examples, both who came through the enabling programs. One who was a mature age student, was looking after her husband who was dying of a terminal illness. She told me this at the start of the program, and it was quite interesting why she said that. She said, look, if I have to go away for a number of weeks, this is why. And also she said, I don't necessarily want other people to know about it. I'm not ashamed of it, but to me, being at uni is a stable place. While all other things are chaotic, because she was also looking after younger teenage children, this is one place which is my place, and I want to focus on other things. At one point she said, it's like a happy space. And I thought, study being a happy space, that's quite nice to think about. Similarly, for another student who was an 18-year-old, was looking after his mother who was in and out of hospital, again with long-term illness and likely to be terminal. And he spent a lot of time in hospital. He said, I took my work in with me to do that. Again, he said, I'm not hiding it from other students, but what I want you to know is that often there might be things I'm not able to do at certain times. So this, I suppose, the thing is trying to work out the student's circumstances are going to be much more complex than what we think. Important things, I think, in terms of rules is get to know the rules of the game. Special consideration, how much you can bend rules in terms of assignments being handed in, other types of assignments, etc. And finally, speaking with the student about their expectations. Sometimes it's better to take time off, go down a course, etc., rather than to try and keep going when it becomes just another burden. Okay, I'll leave it there. I think there's many different experiences that people have in this situation, and thanks.
Right. Okay. We now have Dr. Perez talking about forced migration.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for this opportunity to talk to you about forced migration and higher education, what we can do at the university. So I'm Parisa Glass. I'm Director of Operation with UNSW Clinical Research Unit, and I'm also Director of Entrepreneurship at the George Institute for Global Health. What I'm going to talk to you about today is nothing to do with what I do day to day to pay the rent or the mortgage or whatever. This is to do with the Passion Project, because I'm a forced migrant woman myself. I came here as a refugee many years ago. I finished my high school years and I went to university, built a career. And forced migration is a big issue globally. We read about it, we hear about it, we feel it, we constantly confronted by it. There is almost 120 million people currently that are forced migrant. Only 36 million of them considered refugees. And refugee, we must remember, is a legal status. It's nothing to do with being forced to leave your home. And this could be a result of many things like conflict, violence, human rights violation, or climate change is a big issue. And the most vulnerable are the young people. Essentially, when they are forced to leave, they cope with identity disruption, making social connection is difficult. So there's a lot of information here that you can read later. Women and girls suffer the most for many reasons, as you can imagine, because they're more vulnerable. There's health consequences attached to forced migration, and economic hardship and social isolation. And it's not the okay. But whenever there is a problem, there is an opportunity for impact, and there is an opportunity for all of us to be part of this social impact, because there is thousands of students in our high schools in New South Wales alone that come from just the refugee background. We don't know the forced migrant numbers, and they would be a lot higher than that. And the support services that exist in our universities are not really set up to support them. And the ease of navigating those systems is just not satisfactory. And there is no way for us to assess whether they're effective for those students or not. And there is lots of literature to say that we do need to put in place systems and processes to support these students. And that's why a few of us came together. We all forced migrant women from across the university. There's a couple of students there that came together and put together the Justice Inclusion Access Project, and it got seed funding from EDI. And we are trying to create a connected ecosystem for women from forced migrant background who come to university and pursuing higher education. We call this project GINA, short for Justice Inclusion Access, and we're trying to create inclusive ecosystem at the university, so working with all of you, essentially, and then to connect student journey from the time they enter university all the way to workforce, so connecting with industry and community to allow them opportunities to connect beyond their university years. So this is essentially the pathway, and I know some of you in the audience and others are sitting across different programs that I've highlighted here. So please connect with us, because we want to create an opportunity to build a program, co-design it with you. We don't want to duplicate what already exists at UNSW, essentially co-design it. We've had a few events in the past few months. So this project essentially started in May this year, and we've had a few events during Diversity Festival. We've got an exciting event coming up on 13th of November, where we will announce some funding opportunities for forced migrant women who are pursuing careers in climate change. So this was in collaboration with Trailblazer Recycling and Clean Energy. And I must say, this was really because of my connection with the entrepreneurship space. So the more connection we create between us, I think we can do a lot for women in this space. So that's our key QR code. Please join the community. This is not just a problem for forced migrant women. This is an opportunity for all of us. So I invite all of you and the university members to actually be part of this community. And please email me if you have any questions or you want to be part of this.
Smashed it. 11 seconds to spend. All right. We now have James to speak to us about our Pasifika community.
Thank you. Salamalaba, good morning, everyone. My name is James Perez. I use he, him pronouns, and I work in arts, design, architecture. I'm here to speak about UNSW Pasifika, which is an equity cohort that I'm very passionate about. I just want to give a little bit of context about myself. I'm Samoan Tukalawan. I come from towns of Queensland, first in family, English as a second language. Less, yes, I grew up in housing, did a teaching degree to prove my teachers that I could study and I could excel and write constructive essays. But to prove a point that I'm very passionate about education, particularly students who deserve a second chance in learning in higher education. I'm very lucky that in my job in ADA, I get funding to run a micro community to augment a sense of belonging for students that are Pasifika. We have about 80 students in our network. I started from 2 students that I met at the Courtyard. Hey, are you Islander? And now we have 80, but Power BI says that we have around 2,000, which is quite great. What is Pasifika? Who is Pasifika? Pasifika are learners who families come from Pacific Islands, who identify with the Pacific Islands in terms of their ancestry or heritage. It also includes migrant groups that have come to the Pacific Islands. For example, we have Indian cultures who came to Fiji with like slavery. So for those purposes, Pasifika is quite broad. In Australia, there are 415,000 Pasifika individuals. There is a significant growth of Pasifika population. We have about 1.6 here in Australia. I'm part of a non-profit organisation, and we've recently published our research to understand Pasifika communities and Pacific demographics, to understand the education pain points, the justice system pain points of Pacific peoples. I really want to speak about Talanoa, which is a cultural research methodology that is used across institutions and is used as best practice within classroom settings and in universities, but also, like I mentioned, like a research method. It's very similar to yarning circles. So a safe space, circle, regardless of who you are, what status you have, we're all equal. These values are comprised of ofa, mawhana, malia, and whakapa. So ofa, which is love, is what students see. Students can easily see a teacher's passion for learning. If it's transactional, where you're in class, just there to deposit the knowledge and leave, students see that and they value that. And I have more examples to show, is that when I ran a focus group last year, or 2 years ago, I think, I really wanted to understand how we can actually support Pacific learners. What are the shared challenges and what are those obstacles they have in classrooms? But also, how do we build capacity and ensuring that they come to this network that I run continuously? How do we make that sustainable? There are quotes that you might see on the board here, is that, you know, a tutor who can reassure if you're on the right track, takes the time to check if you understood something, you know, it shows that there is that relational based approach, but also that appreciative inquiry lens. We also see like lots of examples and hear lots of examples in our shared space when we use Talanoa to converse, to take time to hear and listen, is that I was asked if I actually wrote my assignment because it was so well written, which presents deficit thinking. Now, students don't only experience deficit thinking. I also experience it when I'm in different spaces, talking to academics, talking to different teams and professional staff who might say things about, you know, a certain demographic. But I'm patient because I really want to show that there are different ways of being, different ways of doing, different ways of knowing. I might not understand the language in the way that I want to. I might not be able to present how I want to explain what I'm trying to say right now. But I just want to show that there are different ways of doing things, different ways of understanding things. But all it does is taking time, like you mentioned. Lucy, 1 minute left. What UNSW offers is a Pasifika network. It comprises of international and domestic students. Like I mentioned, 80 students in this group. I deliver a combination of networking, employability, and social events, and I work with I work with different institutions around Sydney to come together and deliver these partnership workshops. Other universities, however, deliver a range of initiatives and programs, outreach, culturally responsive programs. Melbourne Uni also has a Pasifika dedicated space for students to come in and learn. And I think that's great. And I think that there are a lot of things that UNSW can do I'm going to be here to advocate for those things, whatever that looks like, but I'm really keen and interested to working alongside everyone else to learn what you do as well, like specifically you. I forgot your name, but we have a lot of students who are in that visa pathway who are going through climate displacement at the moment from the Pacific Island region, which is quite interesting. Thank you so much.
Amazing.
Minutes. I'll come back for 30 next time.
It's so hard, but we will hopefully have bigger workshops on each of these.
Thanks, Lucy.
Okay, we now have Julia talking about our under 18 cohort. Thank you so much.
Hi, my name is Julia. I'm the under 18 coordinator from UNSW International Student Compliance Team. I have worked with under 18 students at UNSW and UNSW College in the past 5 years. Thank you, Lucy, for giving us this opportunity for introducing this really young cohort of students to the wider UNSW community. Well, I hope I don't bore you with legal codes, but here, according to the National Code of Practice, Standard 5, registered providers of overseas students aged under 18 must meet the legislative or other requirements relating to child welfare and protection, therefore the existence of our team. Our job is to ensure that UNSW is compliant to the national code when enrolling underage students, and the young students are well supported while they studying at UNSW. Each year, there are over 100 under 18 international students enrolled at UNSW. And in terms of care and welfare arrangement for these students, they have two options. They have two options. They can choose to come to Australia to study and stay here with their own guardian, mom and dad, mostly. Believe it or not, this is the less popular option. The other option we have is what we call CAAW. They can nominate UNSW. The parents can nominate UNSW to look after their children, their children's welfare. In this case, UNSW arranges accommodation and provides welfare support for under 18 students. Each intake, we have more than 3/4 of our international under 18 students going for the CAW option. CAW is short for Confirmation of Appropriate Accommodation and Welfare. Students who choose this option will need to sign a CAW agreement with us. Under this agreement, they must reside in UNSW approved accommodation, and they must enroll in UNSW under 18 care program, which is a fantastic support program run by our student support team. And they must follow a set of rules that are designed for these students to protect their safety while they live in Australia. For example, they have to follow a strict curfew rule, which requires them to return to their accommodation 10 p.m. every day, and they have to stay in their room till 6 a.m. They cannot leave their accommodation at night. At the beginning of each intake, our team sends out a list of under 18 students to the business partners and program authorities of each faculty. In this email, we inform them of the under 18 rules that these students must follow and communicate the expectations of staff who might be working with under 18 students. For example, when assigning a staff member to work with the under 18 on a one-on-one basis, it's important to check that the staff member has a valid working with children check. When organizing a faculty event or class event in the late evening or a field trip, overnight stays, it's recommended to check if there's any under 18 students in this group. And also to advise them to seek approval from our team so they don't breach their curfew. When discussing with under 18 student about program variation, enrollment variation, or recommending things like IPT or program leave, staff should be aware that additional step would be involved here. And our team must be informed so we can speak to the parent and get their consent. Parents' consent is always required when it involves under 18s. We have a lot of additional forms for under 18 students. Academically, I think this cohort of students perform just as well as our usual international students. In fact, I have seen child prodigies in this cohort. These students might have skipped grades when they were in their local high school, and when they come to Australia, they just turned 16. So when they start at UNSW, they're 16-year-old. I think welfare support is the main issue when it comes to supporting under 18 students. Often these students come to Australia without much independent living experience. Little things like cooking, doing their laundry, managing their finance, schedule their daily tasks could be challenging for them. At home, mom and dad takes care of everything. So my advice here, if you notice any welfare issues in your class or in your consultation with under 18 students, please feel free to reach out to us, and we will connect students with support services, and we can provide timely feedback to their parent. There are just some additional resources if you're interested to learn more about our under 18 program. Thank you.
Sharing so we can just see ourselves. Okay, so I know that seemed super harsh to give everyone only 5 minutes, but the idea is that generally we wanted to get a bit of interest in each of those cohorts, so then we have enough momentum to run a full workshop on each cohort. So if anyone has any questions, because that was part of the keeping it to time, because we want people to be able to engage with us, ask questions, feel free to ask someone specifically or ask generally. But does anyone have any questions or anything they'd want any of us to elaborate on, because we all went for the whole thing? So yeah, does anyone have any questions or anything you'd like any of us to elaborate further on?
I have a question just about the last one because it was the most recent one. Just with the working with children check thing. So you said when staff work one-to-one with that. And actually maybe to talk about my role, I'm an education staff developer at school. And so one of the programs we run is like a tutor training program. And so we try to kind of let tutors know like different things that are and I actually used to work at UNSW College, so I know I needed to have working with children check over there. But if there's someone who's teaching someone in the cohort that's under 18, do they need to have a working with children check?
I assume if it is a group of students in a group setting,
It's different to one-to-one. Okay.
Yeah, because in a lecture or theatre, there may be hundreds of students and there might be 1 or 2 under 18. I don't think that's required, but yeah, in a one-on-one setting, especially if the staff member needs to take them out, say for a field trip or if the staff member is about to supervise this group of students, then usually.
I guess that would be more, recognisable if someone was teaching a first year course. Even though you said it's right. Students at 16, like run down Sheldon Cooper, like it's great, like to come to uni so early. Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah, thanks.
Beautiful. Does anyone have any other questions? Sorry, I'm just asking the online people if they want the transcription up, so just in case the mic goes a bit funny. Does anyone have any other questions or anything? I made everyone rush so much, and there is.
Actually, I do have another question as well for everyone actually. And I think that you mentioned this a little bit when you were talking about students as carers. That, how much of this insight and the resources that we have on these different cohorts feeds into the special consideration process? Because I find that sometimes I have students that I'm counselling, not counselling, but I'm talking to them about what their situation is. And in my perception, a lot of it, I'm like, oh, I think this actually does qualify for special consideration. Let's go and kind of put it through the portal. But I'm wondering if with any of these different kind of groups, if there's any guidance around how this could inform like extra time or kind of more support that's needed, and how that's recognised in the sometimes strict requirements of the special consideration process. That might be too big a question, I don't know.
I think, Dom, you're probably the main man to answer that one. You're from that team.
Well,
Sort of.
Yeah.
I think that there's a couple of things here. One is to think about those official mechanisms. And one of those too is equitable learning services as well. When we talked about the ELP equitable learning plan, which many people might be familiar with, that's, I think, one thing for students to be aware of, and sometimes I think to encourage students to register and apply for. The second thing in terms of special consideration, partly that's another team who organises that. But you're quite right, there's sometimes quite strict, or there are guidelines in terms of special consideration for what and for what reasons. And I find that sometimes I think it's difficult for some of the students, from my experience, who are mature aged and they have already got a busy life, you know, outside of university study, you know, they're just trying to fit university study into something. Then things like work aren't necessarily strictly part of a reason that you can get special consideration. I might be wrong about that. So I think it's great to have someone from that area to actually talk about that. But mostly what I do is I encourage people to apply for special consideration, because sometimes I find that it works, you know, there's in terms of how it should work. Other times I think, as a number of speakers have mentioned, sometimes it's just the speaking with students, which is actually really important, hearing their perspective. I think, as James was saying, just the listening is actually one of the most important roles to play. And if needed, if there's then special aspects on top of that in terms of more specific counselling knowledge that's needed, then of course I think to then refer on to psychology and wellness. But I think there is that aspect when you're just a person who's listening to another person. You're an insider in terms of how the university works. I think for most students, they see themselves as outsiders. And I think that's actually important to sometimes to let them know there are possibilities. And it might well be in your role as well that there might be ways of enabling, let me be careful about putting this, but enabling students to do things within class or assessments just because you know of their circumstances. I think that's part of what you do as either program coordinator or convener, etc. as well. But I think, yeah, the official one, I think absolutely, I think students should become very familiar with how to put in those processes. But it'd be good to know the guidelines, particularly.
I had to apply for special consideration when I was doing my masters because during that time, my dad was diagnosed with Parkinson's, and between all my other things, I then had a grief reaction, like as if he had died. And so it was my tutor who noticed normally I was sitting at the front of the room, was always, you know, like just as annoying as I am now. But when that happened, back of the room, hoodie up, like unsuccessfully trying not to cry. And so she sort of said to me, like, do you know about the support services? So she went through, like Dom said, this is all the stuff that we have for you for your upcoming assignment. And she also made it very clear what things she couldn't budge on. So, you know, because of that program, there was an attendance minimum. And so she said, you've already missed one class, you can miss two more, but then you cannot miss anymore, and that's it. And she said, I know how much you care about this, so I really need you to think about, and, you know, went through, apply for special consideration for an extension on this assessment, like, and all of that. But I think it helps to have this is what we can do, but these are things that we just can't change. And so there's that realistic expectation of what you can and can't do. And I mean, especially for some of our students, even if you give them time, if it's possible within a tube, like just let them go to the side and be like, you know what, if you are so busy that you can't do special consideration at home, just do it during this activity. Like just giving them that bit of you know, time and empathy and having that moment of, I've noticed something's happening. So that can help as well. Because that's like undiagnosed disability for me. Like even if I knew, like, even if I suspected something's wrong, you can't get an ELP without an actual diagnosis. And I've heard students speak here at UNSW that know they have a disability and they cannot afford a diagnosis. Like I went through the cost before, it's crazy how much it costs. So yeah, like, but they'll still need all of that support. Yeah.
I mean, I have been concerned with some conversations that I've had with students where, like, you know, I've noticed something and so I've said, look, like, this is what we can do. And they've said to me, the reason I didn't apply is because I've applied in the past and it's been knocked back. Or I didn't think that this was severe enough, where one person was essentially caring for her mother who'd been diagnosed with cancer. And I'm like, this is exactly what special consideration is for. So like how, like, and I think there's, with back to that deficit thinking that you were talking about, that sometimes I think the university has the systems in place and they say, well, if the students don't take them up, then they've chosen not to. And I'm like, that's not the case. Like it's like the hurdle to actually apply for some of these things is like insurmountable for some of our students. And of course, you know, I wish that more people would just use UDL principles. So I guess what I'm really interested in is if after this, and like you said, there's going to be more workshops, like how I can incorporate this in both our tutor training program and also our convener program as shortcuts to different places where they one, know about these things, and two, like can direct people if they need to. So I would love that from this if possible.
Yeah, amazing. Yes, definitely.
It's like two things. Like for me, it's like the obstacles of like me having to break down those barriers. Like one, assume knowledge of what they already know. And then the other thing is like, okay, you had a peer that had a negative experience with services. How do you then convince, you know, a student within your community to like really go for it and apply for it? You're not hand-holding, it's just like really reassuring them that like, if you just go for it and apply your case to the situation, like 100%. But unfortunately, it has to take a small, invisible micro community to really like showcase, like you, or reveal like, you know, a system that could work for them. And it's just like, how do we find a way that's like, yeah, how do we like remove that blur?
Just make it visible. Like this stuff is here. Like make it visible, actually accessible, and not just expect like a really high level of executive functioning from everyone to know where to go for something like we can't just keep having more. Oh yeah, they can do this. It's like they don't know about that.
Yeah. But there is a difficulty with that as well, though. So I'm sure, like Kate would confirm with her team, like there's support for students, but how do you share that support if students don't read emails, or if they don't check Teams, or if they don't do this? And then, okay, we've got posters, but when they don't go to that part of campus, so, and then, oh, well, maybe we can put it in Moodle, but not everyone puts it in Moodle. And so there's lots of work with those student-facing teams to not saturate students, because that's when they switch off. But then how do we engage the students that are already switched off? So it's very hard. It's difficult because we want to be like, there's all these things, but then also if the students are just like heads in the ground, not looking at all the things we're trying to do, then that's where that personal connection as a teaching staff, you can kind of get that.
Well, that's what I think the opportunity is, and that we're really working on that convener level. Like it's like you're building a culture with your learners of what that is, and embedded help is part of it. Not just help seeking or help offering, the help is embedded, like it's easily available, people can see it, and that's a really critical part of your role. It's not just, you know, getting all the marks at the end of term and getting all the bums. That's not what it's about.
Amazing, yeah.
I mean, one thing is help, but also is kind of like embedding proper language and understanding in the, you know, academic staff and professional staff. Because there is kind of like a gap of understanding around neurodiversity. I also have ADHD. You know, I'm been diagnosed with ADHD. I live with ADHD. I went through like education with ADHD, and as a PhD student, I didn't find any support, not at this university. I'm sure this here would be amazing. But there's a lack of understanding and a lack of understanding of staff. And I've heard people, you know, kind of like talking to me, you know, in ways that were not great. Also as a migrant, you know, like the moment that people hear an accent, it doesn't matter how much or how little you know, the moment that you have an accent, bam, you're, you know, a stigma. So I think the you know, one of the ways to deal with these things is to really kind of like go to the structure and change the way that we think about difference and and really kind of like get rid of those biases, because I'm sorry that anyone would say that to you as or to any student just because the way you look, or that people think that you don't. I guess you don't speak very well, or you don't understand because you have an accent. So it's all of these biases and stigmas that have to be, kind of like, and it's structural. Sorry.
No, and that's what would be ideal is workshops like this. You would hope that everyone attends them and we change lives and all that. But generally, and with all the inclusive teaching workshops I've run, everything, you're preaching to the converted. It's people that already do great things. Yeah, Parisa.
I was just going to add to what you said. It's really important around the empathy of our staff and the educators, because I've had, as part of our project, we're also trying to listen to students to tell us what their issues are within the university and outside. And I've had a case where one of the women students told me that she had to do an assignment at the same time her mother was stuck back in Lebanon and bombs were being dropped, and she's on the phone to the mother going, well, go hide somewhere, and she's trying to finish an assignment that was due in a couple of days. And because the lecturer was empathetic to that issue, gave her an extension. There was no mechanism really for her that she felt that she's empowered to take to give her that extension. So while they're dealing with the trauma, so the mechanism, the systems around, it's not really inclusive of different situations that people, and we all go through different situations of life, right? We are not here just to do an assignment.
I mean, we can all hold out hope that the Accord is fully implemented, and because there's lots of stuff in there in terms of teaching staff training and qualifications and supporting equity and all of those sorts of things. And we're definitely pushing to try and get the Accord to try and get UNSW to do some great things. But yeah, it's difficult. Like, we can just do what we can do. Hopefully, feel free, once the recording comes out, share it, widely, share it as much as you want, and hopefully some people will learn about some different cohorts and get enough interest to then dive more into it, and then we can hopefully run bigger things and we can develop resources and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, it is a big difficult task. Institutions, particularly like UNSW, being like the GO8 and everything, we're not traditionally a equitable space, and so there's a lot of work to be done for us to get to a point where we can really support these students. But it's something that we can all do together.